Reactive training systems.
Even before we get officially started, I know we can talk about this more, but what are the you know reading everything in the article, it all makes sense. It's all fairly logical as far as I'm concerned. Now maybe it's not logical to everybody else, but I mean, what we're
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess it wasn't like a huge surprise, right? Like I didn't have anything that I would consider like, oh, that's the total opposite of what I expected, But I mean, that's good, right?
right, right. But I feel like, but maybe other people are going to be surprised. Maybe people are
Sure.
surprised that if you train consistently and if you adapt to higher frequencies and higher intensities, that you'll get stronger.
Yeah. Well,
So that's why maybe we need to look at it from a couple angles and say, hey, this is stuff that we live, this is stuff that we do every day, but maybe it's not the case for a lot of people.
sure. Well, and so I made some revisions to the article since the one I sent to you, because I just thought I need to be a little bit more clear about the main point of what I'm trying to say here. And I mean, we talked before we even started the project that we're pretty sure it's going to work. I mean, I would have been shocked if we did it and the average person got weaker or didn't gain anything on this
Right.
program. So we were pretty sure it's going to work. It did work better than I expected it to by a good bit. I mean, I didn't really pin down like a guess of what I thought people would gain, but I guess if I had the hindsight guess now, I would have said, 10 kilo average, but we were at a 20 kilo average over 8 weeks, which is ridiculous as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And I mean, these are middle 300 Wilks scores too. I mean, they're not national champions, but there's 100 of them, and the average training age was almost it was 4.5 years or so on average. Which is, I mean, that's not a total noob at all. That's a solid, what I would consider an intermediate lifter. Added on average, added 20 kilos to their total over 8 weeks. So, I mean, the results were good. They were better than we expected. But I think the real question that we wanted to get out of the analysis was more like, who is successful with this program? Who does really well with these really high volume, high frequency styles, and who doesn't? Because if we can kind of figure that stuff out in advance, then we can apply these strategies a little bit better. So, I mean, no, it wasn't like surprising. Like, just to give an example, we found that people who felt like they were better recovered performed better. I mean, that's not groundbreaking, but I mean, that's solid, and that's something to bring to your attention. So if you're thinking about applying this, it's like, well, every time I raise the frequency past 2 times a week, I feel like I'm going to die. Well, okay, that's maybe something important to consider.
Right. And the thing that at that point, then maybe this is not the program for you at this point,
Yeah,
if that's the case. But if we know this, if we can present this ahead of time, we could probably save somebody a couple weeks of anguish, and let them know, when they come back to it, or when the time is right, that that plus about 20 kilos in gains will be waiting for them.
right. Yeah, so it's definitely a matter of trying to. And that was the second thing that I took away from the whole project was some some better fidelity, some better resolution on a few principles in terms of dialing in a strategy for the lifter. So even if, like, we kind of came into it looking at this strategy, what makes this strategy work, and what I came away with was some answers to that, but also some answers for other strategies as well. The recovery thing, the injury thing. So one thing that we picked up on injuries was that I mean, it's also fairly obvious. People that didn't get injured had better results than people that did
Right.
get injured. Yeah, okay, not shocking, but so if you can push a lifter to put down a lot of work, don't get beat up, don't get injured, don't fail to recover, then that's who seem to thrive the best on this sort of scenario. The trick is to dial in a strategy so that it fits all those things, because it's definitely a balancing act.
Absolutely. So part of it is it's like we almost need to do a psychological profile before we get. We've talked about that recently, talking about a lifter's mental state
Yeah.
coming in, but also what the lifter is thinking and also what they're experiencing, and a lot of times those are different, as we've learned.
Sure. Well,
But
it's
yeah,
the whole recovery thing is interesting, right? So people that recover better perform better, and then get better progress. So what do we mean by recover better? Well, the question that we asked in the exit questionnaire was, it, it was basically, how recovered did you feel throughout this process? Which, I mean, there's some big limitations with asking a question like that, but I mean, that's the best we have available at the time. And we found that people who had this perception that I was always feeling pretty good, feeling pretty much ready to train, they in general had much better results than the people who were like, felt more beat up than normal, or definitely better than the people who were like, I barely completed the program. um, so it was a subjective perception, right?
right,
And my feeling lately, in the past, I don't know, past couple of years, has been kind of moving in the direction of, like, take track, for example. We have a system that helps us to monitor our lifters. My tendency over the last several years has been to value more and more those subjective questions out of track, those questions that ask you, how are you feeling? So we ask you that results over a long period of time, and we get a much more accurate. We can also see kind of in progress, how hot are we running.
right,
If you have a lifter who's kind of beyond a certain threshold, and you're like, well, I mean, the results of this seem to indicate that, uh, before that, which we've been doing, but it's nice to have a little bit of concrete data to back up that approach. I mean, I've had a lot of lifters who, I tell them, look, you're feeling too beat up. We're going to pull the throttle back on your training a little bit. And they go, no, no, give me a couple more weeks. I'll make the adaptation. Let me hang in there. Like, it's a, like, they don't want to fail the program, but it's the other way around. Like, the program has to work for them, and it's just that if it's beating you up now, like, yeah, you might be able to hang in there and just kind of survive it, but that's not what we're after. And it's nice to have something that says, hey, people that don't do that get a lot better results.
exactly. And I see that firsthand with the people that
Oh, I
I'm
think I
coaching.
lost your sound. I hope that's not on my end. Where were
So,
we?
well, so we were talking. One of the things that I thought about during our technical difficulties was the idea of obviously being better recovered to better optimized training. And I wonder where the sweet spot is for that. Like, because what I don't want people to do is kind of walk away and take it as precious, so precious that they have to get a perfect 8 hours of sleep. They have to hit every single macro or whatever diet thing they're following. And, everything has to be perfect. Stress level has to be like a 3 or below. Like, where's the balance? Like, how do we find the balance for that? Because this is reality. This is real life. This is not. There's no such thing as a professional power lifter,
Yeah.
for the most part. And how do we make this work for the greater population, or what tips do we have for that?
Sure, sure. I mean, that's a good question. And I mean, that's kind of like my final takeaway from this, as far as the question of what seems to make this strategy more effective. And it's the same kind of general rule as what would make any strategy more effective. It's people who did more work than what they were used to, got better results. People who recovered better got better results. So, I mean, if you just kind of look at those two things, like, you want to push as much work as you can while staying as fresh as you can, and that's kind of the old saying. And it's a balance that you've got to walk. Like, if you're working hard, you're going to feel crappy sometimes. and that's not the end of the world. And it's also not the end of the world to like this, it's kind of become a joke now, but the whole no days off thing is, that's too far the other direction.
Right, right. But people, I think people, nobody, nobody knows how they feel anymore. And so going in that other direction, like that, your feelings are a lie, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Um, there's, it's a delicate balance. It's
Yeah.
definitely a delicate balance. But I think when people find it,
Well, it's compounded by the fact too. Like if you look at the people who were pretty darn beat up during this program, who they felt pretty crappy. They felt worse than they normally do. The average gain was still something like 10 kilos over the 8 weeks. They still had a pretty good result. It's not something that I would be unhappy with.
no, no.
So they felt crappy, but they still did well. And I think like that can kind of trick us sometimes. Because you have this training cycle and you push through it and you get to the end and you set a 10-kilo PR. That's no joke. And you go, huh, man, really pushing it through those crappy feelings. I was rewarded at the end of that, and so that kind of reinforces that. But what we see here is that the people who, it's not even that they changed the program or anything like that. It's just that they were better able to handle that workload, got better results. It would be interesting to see, what would be the case if we dialed down the workload on those people who were feeling beat up. Like, would they have better results compared to like the people who didn't? I don't know. I mean,
Well, I mean, is there a general strategy for that, as far as, and I know there is, as far as kind of RTS philosophy and methodology, but just like, so someone comes in and they're feeling crappy for the week, or they're feeling crappy for a couple days. What do you, and it's early. It's not like they've been feeling crappy for 5 training sessions in a row, but it's just 1 or 2 training sessions. What do you recommend for the lifter out there who's trying to stay with the program, but needs to make kind of an inline course correction, just so they can sustain their training?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it too. I mean, in the beginning, we used to use a lot more strategies that focused on that daily measure, trying to get the right work for today. Let's make today as perfect as we can, and if we stack up all these perfect days, then magic. Well, what I've found is that that's a little bit of an overfit. You know, at least when it comes to volume, training volume, which is where most of your training stress is coming from, is the overall volume load. So I found that that's a little bit of an overfit. So we've kind of gone away from stuff like fatigue percents a little bit, and more to like programming a fixed number of sets. And because as long as you recover, let's say week to week, then you're pretty much okay. As long as you have some point during the week where you go, I feel maybe not even 100%, but I feel probably 90%. I feel pretty good. Um, that's what we want. I feel like that's a good spot to be in. If you don't have that every week, that's not the end of the world. It's you can still progress, and you can still it's not yet to the point where you need to make like emergency training modifications or anything like that. So really, like stuff like track, what I've been doing with that lately is putting a lot more emphasis on that long-term number, which is like a 30-day average. So it's like this it's a single number that's telling you basically on average how you felt over the last 30 days. And when that starts showing too much fatigue, okay, that's a pretty good indicator that we need to put the brakes on things.
So it seems like it's more like midterm to longer term accumulated fatigue versus immediate fatigue. So if
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
if you
we're
miss,
doing a lot less of the daily variation sort of thing. and what we'll do is we'll look at that and like, look, this training plan that we've got you on right now over the last month has been burning a little too hot, so we need to pull back the overall stress. Now, whether that's a volume thing or an RPE thing or whatever, that's going to be dependent on the strategy, the coach's decision. But yeah, in general, that's kind of how we're finding that line of, you've got to push it, but not too much,
Right. Right. And if you have one bad day, even two bad days, it's still a little bit too early to kind of panic and freak
Yeah.
out and quit the program or
And I
whatever
mean,
you're doing, right?
I know, I know that you know this stuff, so I'm just kind of I'm kind of figuring that you're seeing some of this in the people in your gym. Maybe
Yes.
some
Yeah.
people that were working on the project.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and it's funny because and I've said this before, but have a live coach in our situation kind of functions the same way that the track functions. So we're able to see our lifters on a regular basis, interact with our lifters on a regular basis, and we have, we can see where things are trending. So if someone comes in and it's just they had a tough night the night before, that's not a reason to change everything. Even if they had a tough week, it's not a reason to change everything. But if we see things, very similar, and it's and I think that's the beauty of track, is that it can accomplish that in lieu of, say, having somebody watching you on a regular basis. Um, we know when to make the course corrections. We know when to do it, and we'll ride things out a little bit longer too. Where I think that generally the lifter is experiencing that kind of the lifting sadness is it feels a lot worse to them than it seems to us.
Yeah, and I mean that's the whole benefit of having a tool like track, right? Is so that um, you can systematize that.
Right.
It's so easy to overvalue your emotional feeling of the moment. Like you have that bad workout and you go, "Oh man, nothing is working. I need to change the whole plan." No, and that's why having something like the long-term view on track or anything similar is good. And I mean, I would go one further is to say we saw this correlation between how a lifter feels and their gain, you know. And I know that there's a kind of a general push to turn everything objective, everything that we can, let's make it as objective as possible. So that's where we get stuff like HRV and stuff like that. And that stuff can be valuable, but I just want to highlight the fact that the correlation we saw was to subjective feeling over a long period of time. And if you can more accurately get at that, then I think it's more reliable.
So you're talking about a hybrid model here.
Yeah.
You're talking about finding the proper balance between objectivity and subjectivity,
Yeah.
dialing both in, using them to support each other, and getting better at assessment as a whole.
It's like Coach Mladen Jovanovic talks about complementary, complementary training, complementary between skill practice and like a foundational quality. This would be another one, complementary between subjective measures and objective measures. Like the truth is somewhere between those, and you've got to find how they complement each other. And I think that's brilliantly put.
Yeah, I mean, and this is not straying too far, but just to give perspective. I mean, do you still find that you're working with that for yourself, as far as kind of
Working
balancing
with
out the objectivity and the subjectivity?
Yeah, yeah, I am. I take my track test every day, like you're supposed to. Gosh, I have so many lifters who are like, "Yeah, I'm taking my track," and I go look at their data, and they take it like 4 times a month. Like that's not like you've got to have consistent data points for me to see. So I know like 3 Sundays ago you felt pretty good, but that doesn't mean anything. Like we've got to know like in a little bit more of an aggregate, how you're
Right.
processing things. So I take my track daily or really, really close to that. I also record my HRV. We had a couple lessons in RTS Classroom last year, maybe the year before,
I think it was
from
last
Dr.
year.
Mike
Yeah.
Nelson. where he did like a 4-lesson deep dive into HRV. And I thought it was really interesting. So since then, I've been recording my data, and it's useful. It's definitely useful to me. Um, but I'm very much more reliant on the subjective trends more than the HRV trends. Um, it's, I have the device that doesn't cost me anything. It cost me a minute in the morning to record it. But, if my son wakes me up and, I'm not going to be able to get a good measure that day, I don't worry about it. Um, I think the subjective measure there's just a lot of benefits to it, and I know we've kind of strayed off of Project Momentum. We're talking way more about track, but it's just that it's just a useful tool to find in that stress and recovery balance.
Well, I think this is all relevant because, Project Momentum is done for this year. And now we're kind of, this is more or less a wrap up, and we're talking about how to optimize it, how to make it better. And this is one of the techniques that is, to me, readily accessible, easy to use, and can really improve your performance. And look, at the end of the day, everybody wants to get stronger, everybody wants to get better. And that's a big carrot to dangle in front of somebody, saying, look, you potentially could add 20 kilos to your total.
Right.
That's pretty massive in 8 weeks.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing I want to touch on that I thought was interesting was the age correlation or lack of correlation. I got several emails from people, so there were 400 and some people that signed up initially. I got several from people along the way who either didn't want to complete the project, or they felt that some modification was in order or something like that, because they were older and they didn't think that it was possible that this was an inappropriate workload for an older lifter. And usually that meant that they were in their 40s, which,
are you saying 40 is old?
I mean, they think so. They think so, right? Their words, not mine. But the interesting thing so we came away from this and we thought, well, let's look at these stats. So was there any correlation between the age of the lifter and how much they progress? Maybe this is a young guys program and they gained a lot and the older guys didn't gain hardly anything. And we found that was not true at all. We found that there were people that were kind of all over the map at all different age ranges. In fact, the older lifters tended to be more clustered around the mean, I would say. You had fewer outliers, but that means fewer really great responses and fewer really negative responses as well. They tended to be a little bit more clustered. I mean, in general, we had mostly 20 to 30-year-old lifters, but we did have plenty of people who were outside of that range, plenty of masters lifters too, and yeah, there just wasn't a correlation to that. Now, there was a correlation between age and injury. Our more severe injury categories tended to be a little bit older lifters, rather than the younger guys,
Right.
which that's interesting. But if you're able to complete the program and not get injured and recover well, then age didn't really have a bearing on it. So it goes back to, what we've said in the past. Like, people ask me about what do I do about training older lifters. I don't treat age. Age isn't a problem to be treated. It's maybe recovery. And older lifters sometimes do have recovery issues that need to be addressed, but younger lifters do too sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I feel like overall older lifters are a little bit more brittle, so you have to take their recovery a little bit more seriously. But the same thing could happen for a younger lifter who's had a history of injury.
Or really low work capacity or anything like that. Yeah.
So it's kind of taking the individual more than, say, generalizing and saying, well, masters can't do this, and this is only for juniors and sub juniors, or however you want to put it. But it's for whoever can handle it. And to be clear, it's not for anybody who hasn't done this program. It's not as daunting as maybe we're making it seem. It's like we're saying people who finish it. It's just like anything else. It's like anybody who finishes any project. It's not because of the difficulty. A lot of times it's because of just the commitment and just
Right.
or the desire, or some people, certain people started it, got halfway through and realized it's not for them, and that's okay too.
And to just kind of add a little numerical background to what you're saying, so we had 113 respondents, so people who completed the program or went through the program and responded to our questionnaire at the end. So 113 data points that we could use. 74%, I think, gained 10 kilos or more. So the vast majority had a very successful run of this program. So we're saying, like, if you can handle it, it's not like the worst thing, it's not like the hardest training ever, because 3/4 of the people felt pretty good throughout, made great progress. Some people didn't, and this is really about finding out, if that's you or not.
Right. And we always say this is not everything is for everybody, and I think sometimes people feel that, but the key is, if it works for you, then it's going to work really, really well.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's what we've seen.
I wanted to touch also on what I thought was a surprising result. And you and I talked about this. You didn't think it was so surprising, but I thought, in the initial recruitment letter that we sent out, I said, we're looking for people who are used to a training frequency of, twice a week on the squat and deadlift and 3 times a week on the bench, because we didn't really discuss what this program is like, but it's a really high frequency program. It's 4 times a week on the competition lifts. It's high volume, it's kind of more in that direction. So we wanted people who were, somewhat acquainted with those higher frequencies. So that's what I said. Of course, not everybody listened. We had some people who joined the project who were used to training the lifts once a week, And my thought was, people who weren't used to the frequency, it would just be too much work for them. They would get beat up and get broken down. And then the people who were used to higher frequencies would thrive a lot better. And what we found was kind of the opposite. There was no correlation between your prior training frequency and injury. So that didn't really play out. Like, if you were only used to doing the lifts once a week before, that didn't necessarily mean you were going to get hurt by going immediately into a 4 times a week program.
Right.
There wasn't really any correlation to the injury statistics. But if you were only used to once a week training before, those people on average gained a lot more than the people who were used to 4 or 5 times a week training. I mean, I thought that was a little surprising, because it shows that those people didn't get beat up. They didn't get worn down and injured. Like, I kind of thought, if there's a risk here, that would be it. That didn't seem to pan out, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. Maybe part of it is that they actually figured out how to use RPEs properly, because hopefully, if you're using RPEs properly, they will keep you in line, as long as you don't get out of control with thinking, well, I should hit this, or it doesn't matter what you should hit. It's what there's a lot. That's a whole other conversation. But learning, because obviously this whole program is RPE based, and for a good, for the primary lifts, and learning how to use it properly can actually keep you in that right kind of rev range, if you want, without redlining too much and kind of killing yourself, essentially.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that was interesting. And I mean, that goes to say too, like, the people who are working harder got better results, as long as they were able to tolerate it,
Yeah.
So that's the difference. How fast can you get stronger? Well, how much work can you tolerate and still recover?
So basically, there's still hope for humanity here. As far as it goes, people are willing to put in the work and see some gains. So that makes me happy today.
Yeah, a little moral justification, maybe,
Exactly. We're not sadists.
Right. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers what I thought were the interesting points. We don't have the article up at the time of this recording, but I feel sure by the time this gets posted, we'll have the article up on the RTS website. it'll be at articles.reactivetrainingsystems.com, and you can look around there and find the article, read the whole thing, check out we got lots of really neat graphs. So
Yeah.
if you like graphs, this article's for you. We talk about nutrition and how that plays into it, sleep, and some more details on the recovery and the age thing and the injury thing. And so, yeah, a lot of details. So if you're into that sort of thing, it's articles.reactivetrainingsystems.com. Paulie, thanks for running the program with the people in your gym and everything. That's beyond helpful that we have more data points to weigh in here. So appreciate that. Appreciate you hanging
No problem.
out
Yeah.
chatting today. And yeah, I guess that's about it. It's about all we have time for anyway. So always more to talk about. We'll make sure to do another one of these soon.
Reactive Training Systems.